covering interview techniques. So here's a look at, why is my computer not working? There we go. Here's a look at what you can expect with today's presentation. So the first thing I want to cover is, what is an interview? Why do we have to go through this thing? What is this thing, and what can you expect from it? Beyond that, we're going to talk about what you should do before an interview, during an interview, and after an interview. All of those are important. What you do pre, post, and during. Then we're going to cover some best practices. So what are interview best practices for interviews that are taking place in person, Zoom, via the phone? And then we'll move into some common don'ts, if you will, some interview mistakes, things that you want to avoid, or behaviors or practices that you want to avoid. And then finally, we'll move into some common interview questions that you're likely to face. And then I'll provide you with some strategy on how to tackle those questions. And of course, there's, as I mentioned, time for questions and answers at the end. But again, if you want to interrupt me as I go through the presentation, by all means, feel free to unmute yourself and do exactly that. Okay. So, okay, we're here for the interview. What exactly is the interview? What is it? Why do we have to go through this entire process? So what do I have to say is, first of all, to any of you who are currently interviewing, congratulations, because what this communicates to me is that your resume and cover letter, which are designed to generate interest, are doing their jobs. They've generated interest and they've gotten you an interview. And now it's the time for you to seal the deal. Seal the deal. And what I mean by that is in this like question and answer process, roughly 75% or more of the time is really the interviewers asking you a series of questions, right? You get some time at the end to ask questions. It's usually not a lot of time, but you will be given the opportunity to ask questions at the end. And as you'll see later, you'll definitely want to have some questions prepared ahead of time. But nevertheless, this is sort of a question and answer session where ultimately the interviewer or the interviewers are getting to know you better. And this is an opportunity for you to get to know the position, the company, your department, your colleagues better, right? So they're determining for themselves, is this person qualified? Are they fit for the job? Are they going to fit our team? Do they have what it takes? And you're determining for yourself, is this job actually what I think it is? Can I do the work? Does it excite me? Am I going to be contributing in a way that that makes sense, that I wish to be contributing, right? Do I want this opportunity if offered the position? So those questions, those decisions are being made through this question and answer session, right? So they're getting to know you, you're getting to know them, and each of you are determining, is this organization, is this team, is this job the right fit for one another, okay? So what can you expect in the interview? The first thing I want to mention is that the interview is unavoidable at best. You can expect to experience and endure an interview. There's no getting out of it. It's part of this process. It's a requirement. It's done. You have to do it. But what can you expect within the interview? The short answer to that is variance. The interview process varies considerably by organization. And that can be a little bit frustrating because it's sometimes unpredictable. But I'm here to tell you that that's the name of the game. So some organizations, you might be contacted by a recruiter first. Other organizations might be the hiring manager connecting with you, or someone on the larger team. The hiring committee might be in touch with you. You might only have one interview. You might have a series of interviews, or you might have a series of interviews with some applicable components like assessments after all of your interviews. So I'm here to just tell you that the interview process, it varies considerably. Excuse me. So as I mentioned, the interview is unavoidable at best. There is some structure, which is sort of good news in all of this, in that applicants generally receive the same questions and encounter, what do I want to say? Encounter the same interview process as others. And this is this is by design. This is to make sure that organizations are treating all applicants equally and fairly, because you have to ask the same questions. All candidates have to go through the same process. So there is some level of structure, and that structure aims to provide fairness. In general, you can, depending on sort of your objective here, if you're applying and interviewing for a full-time job, there are likely at least 2 interviews or 2 stages of the interview process. The first generally takes place in what we call a pre-screen, and a pre-screen is usually a phone or a quick Zoom. It's less than 30 minutes, oftentimes 15 minutes. Where broad questions are answered or asked by a recruiter or the hiring manager. They just want to know that, yeah, you are who you present to be, you have some knowledge of the organization, of the position, and that you do fit. And then you'll move on to another interview. So the second interview is generally much longer than 30 minutes. They can range from 30 minutes to several hours, right? These days, it's a mix of in-person and virtual still. But questions, you may experience the same questions that you received in your pre-screen. You may receive new questions. Questions at the second level are generally more specific. They want to know, they want you to provide specific examples, illustrations, demonstrations, exemplifications, right? They really want you to speak to past behavior and what you've done in other roles, because past behavior is predictive of future behavior. So beyond that, there may actually be a third or so on interview, as I mentioned. It's really organization dependent. And again, you may encounter some level of assessment after or before or in the middle of your interview process. So I feel like I'm just repeating myself here, but I just want to make clear that the interview process isn't always clear, and it's not going to be the same for every organization. So it's just important for you, when you're provided the opportunity to ask questions, you might just sort of clarify what might be next, and I'll go into that in further detail later. So what should you be doing before the interview? Right. So the interview takes preparation. One of the first things that we recommend is that you visit the organization's website. Hopefully you've done this to some level before you've applied to the position, but now it's time to take a further look at the organization's mission, its vision, its values. Does it have a 10-year plan? In what cities or countries do they have offices? Right? How are they structured? How are they organized? What impact do they have? Right? So getting a more comprehensive understanding of the organization, because not only are you applying for a specific role at the organization, the role is in the organization, and you need to have some knowledge, some background, some understanding of what the organization is, who they are, because you're likely going to encounter a, why do you want to work for Oxfam type of question. The second piece that we recommend is just use LinkedIn. Do you have any connections at the organization, and how might those connections be of value to you, right? Is there an alum? Is there someone at the organization that you know professionally and could connect with that might sort of give you some level of insight or might advocate for you? The third is, this isn't always possible, but where possible, it's in your best interest to research people who are in your committee. So who's going to be in the room, the in-person room or the virtual room with you, asking questions, right? So what are their position titles? What departments do they work in? That helps you understand the types of questions that they might ask, or the angle or the lens or the view from which they might be coming from. It's helpful to sort of have an idea of who's in the room. You're not always going to know this. Not all interviews are clear, and you're not always in the know beforehand who's going to be in the room. So use it to your advantage where you can. The fourth bullet point there is to prepare. This is something that I strongly advocate for. And in your preparation, what I would encourage you to do is just to take some time, put everything aside, and sort of get into that mental mindset of the interview, right? You're getting ready to interview. Anticipate some questions that they're going to ask. You've got the position description in front of you. They want you to talk about all of these things. So what from the position description might they ask, right? So start to anticipate some questions, formulate some responses, know the job description in and out. And of course, you want to prepare some questions for them ahead of time, and I'll give you an idea of the types of questions that you can ask. So definitely take some time to prepare. I don't want your preparation to become where you're preparing and anticipating questions and formulating responses. I don't want your responses to become robotic, that you've just practiced and rehearsed responses to questions so much that you lose your authenticity. But it's important to sort of anticipate and have an idea of how you're going to respond to certain questions. That's our advice. That second to last bullet point, this is not a salary negotiation workshop. We had that earlier this week, but what we do advise is doing some level of research on salary for your particular role. You want to postpone this conversation as long and as far into the process as possible, because you don't want to make salary appear to be your front and center issue, which then employers start to question, oh, well, what's your primary motivation? Is it just the money? But you should have some sort of sense of, know what your expectations are, sort of know what others in similar positions, industries, cities are being paid. So it's something that you want to be prepared for if it does come up, but our general philosophy is to delay that conversation as late as possible. And finally, practice, right? We have mock interview. We offer mock interviews. All career centers offer mock interviews. You can practice with your friends. You can practice with a voice in your head, right? Through the sort of anticipating questions and formulating responses. So practice, okay? So that's all before the interview. What do you do during the interview? During the interview, it's especially important to listen actively, right? Actively listen. So what does that exactly mean? It certainly means don't cut off anyone who's asking questions, right? Don't cut anyone off, but also pay close attention to what is being asked of you, right? Hear the entire question in entirety. If you're unclear what's being asked, definitely ask for clarification or ask them to repeat the question. Those tactics also help you buy some time to help you formulate a response if you're not prepared. But definitely just taking time to listen to what's being asked of you is important. Remain confident. That's the second bullet point. This assumes that you're going into the session confidently. I can't make you a confident person. There are ways to present confidence, such as by being prepared and having done your research and rehearsed, and just maybe getting into the mental mindset, or yoga, or whatever it is that you need to do, exercise, prayer, worship, whatever that looks like for you, so that you can present your authentic self, and to present as confident is recommended, right? Obviously, you want to present yourself professionally and honestly. This isn't the time to embellish or to tell lies. That's not gonna get you very far. So be your authentic professional self. It's also important to take a moment, right? If you're asked a question and you don't have something immediate that comes to mind, it's okay to say, oh, do you mind repeating the question? Or, oh, that's a great question. Do you mind if I take a second? It's okay to request a second, to get your thoughts together so that you can present a rational, a reasoned response, okay? You probably don't want to employ that tactic each and every time, but it's okay to slow down, to ask for time. The second to last bullet point is just a reminder to pay attention to body language. Sometimes we communicate more in our body language than what we're actually communicating verbally, right? So if we're sitting with our arms crossed, or we're slouched, or we're just too casual in our position, that tends to affect mindset. our mindset. So if we're too casual in dress, too casual in appearance, then maybe our responses are too casual, and we're not communicating our value add, or making a compelling case to the committee. So definitely pay attention to your body language, because your nonverbals are communicating information as well. And finally, during the interview, when you are allotted your time to ask your questions, you're going to want to have questions prepared, right? I mentioned that on the what to do before your interview slide. So prepare some questions. And on the next few slides, I have a couple of questions to just help you with. Yeah. So after the interview, okay, you've done your preparation, you've gone in there, you've presented your best, most compelling case. It's not over. There's some action required here. The first thing that you want to do is to send a thank you email within 24 hours. And what I mean by that is, say, for example, what is it now? It's 12 o'clock, right? It's 12 o'clock on Wednesday. So by 12 o'clock on Thursday, you will want to have sent your thank you emails to everyone who took the time to interview you, okay? Whether you decide to do that individually or one mass email to everyone, that's personal preference. I have some different thoughts on that and strategy on that. But the important piece that I want to communicate here is that it is in your best interest to send a thank you email to the folks who took time to interview you within 24 hours of that interview. Okay. Beyond that, you want to follow up in accordance with established timelines. And what I mean by that is, say, for example, one of your last questions in the interview was, where might we go from here? What are possible next steps, right? So you're asking about a timeline, and they say, great question. We're going to continue interviews this week. We hope to make a decision within 2 weeks from today, and then we'll notify candidates. You should not be contacting this organization before those 2 weeks. So at 2 weeks, definitely follow up. If you haven't heard anything, follow up. So I ascribe to what I call a two-step philosophy. A former colleague of mine ascribed to a three-strike philosophy. I'm a two-strike philosophy. And what I mean by that is, 2 weeks have passed. I haven't heard anything. I'm going to email them right away. Okay. I don't hear anything for another week. I email them again. Hey, I'm inquiring. I invite any information you might be able to tell me. If I don't hear anything beyond that, I'm done. Right. I'm done following up. At this point, I'm assuming you're not communicating to me because you're communicating to me, right? You're telling me something by not communicating to me. A former colleague of mine would follow up 3 times. So at 2 weeks, another week, and another week. Between the two of us, professional career advisors, we don't advise following up beyond that necessarily, beyond 3 times, because then you might start to communicate a message of desperation or these sorts of things, right? So an employer might not think so highly of that, even though you're doing your due diligence of following up. So your takeaway here is to send the thank yous within 24 hours and then to follow up in accordance with established timelines, okay? Okay, so in-person interviews are back. They are happening. I do believe that most are still taking place online and over the phone, but let me just go over some of these really quickly with you. So here are some best practices for those of you who might have an in-person interview. And the first is to dress the part. You're expected to dress professionally. So what that looks like, you know, there are cultural contexts, there are individual differences and preferences in these pieces, but you just want to dress professionally, and I'll leave it vague like that. So everyone defines that a bit differently, but dress professionally. Show up on time. And by on time, I mean 5 to 10 minutes early. If you're 15 minutes, half hour, an hour early, sure, you're there and you're there on time, but then you can become a burden to them. Like, what are they supposed to do with you? Put you in a room? Like, do you hang out in the lobby? What are they supposed to do with you? So be on time, and by on time I mean 5 to 10 minutes early. That's sort of the target. Okay. Number 3 is treat everyone you encounter with respect. This is a good sort of life philosophy, but especially in an interview where you don't know who is who, right? From janitor to CEO to admin to project managers, doesn't matter. Treat everyone that you encounter with respect, because everyone has an opinion. Number 4, if you are in the waiting room, you use it to your advantage, right? You might take a look at, sort of what posters, what awards, what plaques, like what's going on the walls, what's going on in the lobby, what information is there, right? Take a genuine interest in what's being presented there. If it's very sterile, white walls, sort of boring, and there's nothing there but a chair, okay, so maybe you don't really have the option but to sit there. But there is a bit of strategy in using the waiting room to your advantage. Number 5, this is sort of with an asterisk. I don't know if people are shaking hands yet. So if you're comfortable with that, go for it. Yeah, so I think that's kind of a standard. Number 6, you want to bring copies of your resume. And usually prepared committee members, where you've been invited into an interview, will be able to distribute a copy of your resume to everyone who's in attendance. Sometimes it's forgotten or people are added last minute, but it's always good to have a copy of your resume to sort of hand to someone in the room if necessary. Okay. A portfolio, you want to bring a portfolio. Pull it out here. It's just, as everything falls out of it, it's just something like this. It's a notebook, if you will. It's a professional, it's part of the professional image. You have a notebook in there. You can take notes. You can use it to guide you in your thoughts. But definitely bring that along with your resume. You want to speak confidently. Number 8, clearly and positively. So the opposite is, what you don't want to do is, the interview isn't a time to speak negatively about people or past bosses, or to provide sort of negative examples. This is the time for you to present confidently, positively, with energy and excitement and enthusiasm. That's really what the interview is for. You don't want to be the opposite of that. As I mentioned in a couple of slides, you want to ask questions. You want to have your questions prepared. And the types of questions that you ask will look a bit different depending on what stage of the interview you're in. So one of the questions that you might ask are, hey, what are potential next steps? What sort of decision timeline are we looking at? It's a good time to clarify points from the position description. So if there's anything that remains unclear about a duty, a task, a responsibility that you're going to be responsible for, that maybe you don't quite understand, this is a good time to get that feedback and clarification. And even though you were afforded the opportunity to ask questions, you don't want to just fill that space to avoid the awkward silence. You don't want to just ask questions to ask questions. You want to ask thoughtful questions at best, because employers are making decisions about you, and the questions that you ask say a lot about your mindset, where you're coming from, what you're thinking about. So my best advice to you is to ask thoughtful questions at best. And finally, number 10 is, again, to follow up with that thank you. Okay. Let me see. All right. Let me move on to the next slide. If my computer will work. There we go. So Zoom, I imagine that most interviews are still happening via Zoom. I mean, based on what I hear from students, I've only heard a few in person happening. Most are still primarily happening via Zoom. So here are some best practices for Zoom or other sort of virtual platforms. And the first is obvious, right? Check your technology first, make sure that you have the program, you have access, it's working, it's functioning. Within that platform, make sure that you're professional, or that your profile picture is professional, right? So use your LinkedIn picture, whatever you have that's professional. It's recommended, number 3, that you look into the camera while you're speaking, and this sort of it's as if you were in the room looking people in the eye is the equivalent. And I don't know that it's reasonable to stare constantly. I can't do it now, to stare constantly at the camera, but just know that you want to try to have the camera eye level and look into it. And by looking into the camera, that's sort of mimicking the looking someone else in the eye. Number 5, you want to choose a professional background. So the reason for this is you want to be front and center. We don't want to be distracted by pictures in the background or magnets of puppies, whatever the case is. You just want sort of a sterile, plain background where you are the primary focus, okay? Similarly, you want to prepare your surroundings, right? If you have roommates, notify them. If you have pets, maybe make sure they're in another room. Silence your phone, take away your notifications on your laptop or your computer. Just prepare your area so that you are as focused and concentrated as possible. So you still, number 7, even in Zoom, you want to dress the part. You want to dress professionally. I recommend dressing professionally from top to bottom. I know that there's this culture of, oh, it's on Zoom, I'll only dress professional on the top and I'll have my pajama bottoms on the bottom. I'm not here to judge that. What I do know is that psychology has a lot to do with interviews. And when you are dressed from top to bottom, it tends to affect your mental state. And so when you're dressed in full sort of professional gear, if you will, it sets your mindset for an interview. And I would argue, I'll just argue that you should dress from top to bottom, and I'll leave it at that. Number 8, I already mentioned, you want to, again, limit your distractions, silence things. Number 9, avoid the interruptions. 10, again, is just monitoring your body language. You can still pick up nonverbal cues, even though we're on Zoom and not in person. It's okay. You remember that portfolio that I showed earlier? It's okay on number 10 to, number 11, to use notes. So as you're preparing and you're anticipating questions and you're formulating responses, if you want to jot some of that down into your portfolio, by all means do that to help jog your memory, to help guide you. What you don't want to do is be staring at it the entire time, right? It's meant to just casually, quickly sort of reference, I'm back on track, I can focus and continue on. It's definitely okay to use your notes. You just don't want to be hyper focused on them. And of course, number 12 is just practice ahead of time. And finally, this is going to be a lot of repetition. For those of you doing who have phone interviews, generally phone interviews are sort of the pre-screen interview where it's with a recruiter or a hiring manager, and then things move over to Zoom. It's not always the case. Again, I mentioned there's a lot of variance in this process. But for those of you who are doing any level of phone interviewing, number 1, make sure that you have a fully charged phone. Make sure you know who's calling who. Right. So are they calling you? Are you calling them? What phone number? Make sure you understand the logistics. And if you have a landline, maybe this is my own personal influence here, but I feel a lot more confident interviewing. This was when I had access to a landline phone, using a landline phone instead of a cell phone in case there are dropped calls or what have you. The landlines are just much more dependable, but technology has improved, so I'll let that go. Number 4, make sure you have a professional voicemail, right? I don't need to go into detail on that. Speak clearly, right? You're not in person, you're not in Zoom. The person on the other end of the phone can't watch your mouth in addition to listening to you speak. So you want to make sure that you speak clearly. Again, be conversational. There's that active listening part on number 7. You don't want to dominate the conversation. They sort of dictate and control how the session goes. But again, you'll have your piece. You have your piece as you respond to their questions, but you also have your piece to the end where you get to ask your questions. Definitely allow them to interrupt you, but you don't want to interrupt them. So maybe they interrupt you because you're not really answering the question, or maybe you misunderstood the question and they want to redirect or guide you or something. It's proper for them to interrupt you. You don't want to interrupt them necessarily. Just allow them to finish the sentence and then provide your feedback or ask your clarifying question. Number 9, again, it's okay to slow down when sometimes interviews for folks are anxiety producing, right? We get nervous. It's stressful. And in those instances where we're putting pressure on ourselves, sometimes our mind is operating faster than we can speak. So it's okay to slow down and to take a minute, right? We tend to speak quickly when we're under stressful conditions. Number 10, again, I would encourage you to dress the part. And you're like, why, Bryan? I'm on the phone. Again, it all goes back to that psychological piece, right? If you are dressed in sweatpants and a sweatshirt, right? Perhaps you wear those clothes during sort of casual downtime. And, if you're sort of in that dress, in that mindset, you may not be so sharp in your responses. So if you're dressed professionally, you're prepared, you're in the mindset, you're ready to go for the occasion. That's my argument there. Again, prepare your surroundings, right? Put the pets away, tell their roommates, silence your phone, all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah. And again, it's okay to use notes during the phone. No one knows that you're looking at them, but they will know if you're staring at your notes and sort of reading sort of answers that you have prepared in advance. Okay. So that was what to do, or best practices for in-person, phone, and Zoom. So what are some common interview mistakes you want to avoid? I've got 8 of them here. So the first is failing to present your authentic or your real self. So if you've already given them an idea of who you are through your resume and your cover letter, and now they want to see that all come together in the interview process. If you're faking it, it'll be incredibly obvious. And then when if you're offered the job and you come to work and suddenly, you're not presenting in the same way that you did in your interview, there are going to be some consequences. There are going to be issues. So it's just a general life philosophy to present your authentic, real self, especially in the interview. Again, number 2, I've already mentioned this, but the interview is not the opportunity to complain or to be negative. It's quite the opposite. So no talking badly about others. 3, failing to present relevant skills. So I like to think about the position description as the answers to the test, right? The organization is telling you what they want to hear about. Make sure you're talking about those pieces. So if the primary skill is qualitative or quantitative research or program or project management or budget or whatever the case is, talk about those pieces and give specific detailed examples, right? What was your methodology? What tools, what resources, so on and so forth. It's important in your resume and cover letter, you're a little bit broad, but now is the time to be a little bit more detailed. So 3 and 4. 5 is, again, playing it by ear. Don't recommend that. You want to prepare and practice. I'm sure you're tired of hearing me say that. Number 6 is not knowing anything about the company. I find myself repeating this a lot, that Again, you have applied for a particular role and you are doing your best, presenting your most compelling case on how you're qualified for this job, and that's great. But let's not forget that this job is with a particular company or organization, and you need to know something about them, right? So, how do you fit the organization? How do you make a compelling case and say that I'm on your side, I'm on your team, I value the same um mission that this organization is based upon, right? You have to know something about the organization and be able to present a compelling case that you're a fit for the organization in addition to a fit for the role. Okay. Number 7 is just not being able to describe the position. I have been in interviews and I have heard from others where one interview question has simply been, what is the position description? What does it say? I've received that question myself. And again, number 8, we had a separate presentation on this earlier in the week, but asking about salary and benefits in your interviews right away is strongly discouraged because it sets a tone that your primary motivation is money. And excuse me, yes, it's great to be paid. That will happen by virtue of you moving into this position, but making it a front and center topic or a priority is strongly discouraged because it's going to send the wrong message that you're only motivated by the money. You're not necessarily genuinely motivated by the work or the mission or what have you. Okay. Okay. And then these are the last 2 slides that I have, but I want to open it up to Q&A. So let me skip to this one first. Inevitably, as part of the interview process, you are going to encounter what we call behavioral-based questions. And behavioral-based questions are basically the employer asking you for specific examples from the past, right? Tell me about a time when, fill in the blank. Okay, so why are these important? Behavioral-based questions are important because past behavior is indicative of future behavior. So how you've handled situations in the past, how you've thought critically about a particular instance, how you responded, how you act, what skills you employed in the past communicates to an employer how you're likely to respond in the future, and it gives them an idea of what to expect from you. Okay. So behavioral-based questions, you're going to encounter them. This is one particular example where the question is, tell me how you handled a conflict or challenging problem when working with a group of people. Now, you all are students. You've been in group work. You have plenty of examples. In addition to just daily life, we encounter conflict all the time. What I've presented to you here are 3 different methods that you can use to help make sure you're answering behavioral-based types of questions completely, okay? So there's the STAR method, the CAR method, and the SARI method. And if you notice, the common thread among the 3 is action and result. Employers are primarily interested in action and result. So action meaning, okay, verb, what action did you take? What skill do you have? And then what impact did you have on the organization, or what was the outcome? So when asked this particular question, it's always important that you provide some level of context, right? So in this, here, set the scene, right? Give them some context. Tell them what was the specific issue, what action you took, and then what was the result of your action. So that's the STAR method. The SARI and the CAR method are the same as well. So when you use any of these 3 models, it helps you to answer questions in full, answer behavioral questions in full specifically. Okay, then let me go to this last slide and then I'll open it up to questions. But inevitably, you're going to hear, if not all of these questions, you're going to encounter them at some point. It may not be all in the same interview. But the first is, tell me about yourself. Okay, so tell me about yourself, or why are you interested in this position, or why are you interested in this organization, right? Those are numbers 1 and 2. So when you tell me about yourself, this isn't asking you, so tell me about yourself personally, right? Like, oh, I like long walks on the beach and pina coladas and going to the dog park. And that's not what they're looking for. This is time for you to present your professional pitch, your elevator pitch. So maybe you use a combination of your education, right? You're finishing a degree, coupled with some experience that you have, and how together you can utilize those experiences to help them advance a mission or a cause or a project or something, right? So why this position, why this organization? Again, it's important to connect, and maybe you use their mission or their vision or their values, their goals or a strategic plan or reputation, right? The things that you found on the website, connecting to the organization in some way is especially important. And finally, the strengths and weaknesses question. So strengths, that question comes in a number of different forms. So if we were to contact your previous supervisor, what 3 things would your supervisor say are your top strengths? So my general strategy and advice is, hey, there's an entire position description. They want you to talk about all of these things. This would be a great time to talk about those things. Obviously, talk about, what are your natural strengths? By all means, talk about those. It's especially strategic if those strengths are coming from the position description, is what I'm trying to say. So it plays to your advantage if you're talking about your strengths, when they're aligned with skills in the position description. And finally, that weakness question. So tell us about, what is your greatest challenge? If we contacted a supervisor, what would they say was your greatest challenge? This question is particularly tricky because you are making yourself vulnerable, right? Hey, we're all human. We make mistakes. None of us are perfect. Okay. So the point of the question is, yes, demonstrate humility. I make mistakes. I'm not perfect, but here's how I'm compensating for that weakness. Here's what I'm doing in recognition of that challenge, right? So that's the part that you want to highlight is, yes, maybe I'm not so great at this thing, but here's what I'm doing about it. And the weakness or the challenge that you provide as an example, you want to make sure that skill set. So maybe it's Excel, right? Make sure that Excel isn't a major component of your position description, right? If you're seeking a research job and you're using Stata or R or something, SPSS, whatever program, you probably don't want to say that that's your greatest weakness, right? Hopefully that's a strength of yours. So again, when talking about the weakness, you want to demonstrate how you're compensating for the weakness. And then the weakness that you choose, you want to make sure that it's what you're making yourself vulnerable, where you're making yourself vulnerable isn't going to be detrimental to your success in the position. Okay. So hopefully, yes, I've given enough time. Let me see what was mentioned in the chat, if I can figure out. Okay. Does anyone have any questions other than what was outlined in the chat? So Jeff, if you want to email me for the presentation, that would be fine. I don't send it out as a general rule. Any questions? I'm really happy to answer your questions. I actually hate presentations like this where I'm just rambling on and on and on and on to you all. I would much rather answer your questions than just present information.
Hi, Bryan. Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
Just give it a few minutes in case anyone's typing in the chat.
Hello, Brian. I think somebody wants to speak. I don't know if you can hear him.
I think Jeff has a question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? So no, Jeff, I'm unable to hear you.
Hello? I don't know why. Just
We can hear
okay.
you,
Let
Jeff.
me just. Yes, you can hear me, but it seems like Brian does not.
Yeah.
So Jeff, maybe if you want to type in your question. So while here we go. How to talk about salary in interviews. So again, yeah, great. So yes, great question. Hopefully you attended the salary negotiation workshop on Monday or yesterday, one of the days. So you really don't want to talk about it. So I wish I had more context for this question. What you should know going in to the interview is having an idea of your range, right? So sometimes your pre-screen or your initial interview, either the recruiter or the hiring manager will say, okay, this is the name of the position. These are some general duties and responsibilities. This is the pay range. Are you still interested? So some organizations are that direct, that blunt, that upfront, and you make a decision. My general advice is to just complete the interview, and then if it's not within your range, you deal with that outside of the interview. Just get the practice, complete the interview, because you never know what can change. So some strategies are to have a range, right? A range gives you more leverage versus giving them a flat number. So instead of saying 65, my range is 60 to 70. And then you can start having a conversation. Whatever your target number is, you want to make sure it's sort of on the lower end of your range, because through a series of negotiation, it's sort of like the odds are in the favor of the house, so they'll try to like get you lower and lower and lower, so wherever your range is. So you want to make sure that your bottom line is near the end of your range. But that's something that you don't necessarily have to be. You should, again, have the range in mind, but you shouldn't be planning to have this type of conversation generally until the end of the interview process. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. Let's see. Okay, great. Let me see. Let's see here. Brian, for presentation, I have a question about negotiating salaries. Happy to hear we have had a separate seminar. Wonder if any recording for that seminar. So who sent this? Oh, okay. For the person who asked about the recording of the salary negotiation, that workshop was a combination of Jasmine, Waddell, and Joel from the MBA MPP program. I assume it was recorded, but what I would recommend in this instance is just reaching out to Jasmine through email and requesting the recording, and she can furnish it. It has been our goal to record all of these sessions, so I assume it's been recorded, but definitely reach out to Jasmine, okay? Yeah, you're welcome. Tell me about yourself question, but how much information can you provide, or how long should you spend answering the question? Good. Okay, Rachel. So Rachel is asking about the tell me about yourself question. She wants to know how much information can you provide, or how long should you spend answering the question? It's so fantastic question. Thank you for asking. As part of this is gauging your audience, right? So when folks are vested and they're interested, when they're jotting down notes, they're making eye contact, they're nodding their head in agreement, because they're with you, right? They're engaged, they're paying attention, they're eager, they want to hear more. When they're no longer engaged when they start looking at each other, like, when is this person going to be quiet? Like, how is this relevant? Oh, can this end now? So definitely gauge your audience. This is one of those questions that I would anticipate you're going to encounter, and I would encourage you to sort of rehearse and practice in your mind beforehand. But I think at least like no more than 4 or 5 minutes to respond to the particular question is ideal. Let's see what else was in that question. So how long should you spend? No more than 4 to 5 minutes. How much information can you provide? Or so the strategy that I alluded to is, you know, hey, they've asked you to tell them a little bit about yourself. So strategically, hey, I'm here for an interview. I know what they're looking for. I've read the position description. I know it. So let me take 2 or 3 of the most salient pieces from that position description and just kind of make a connection to them, right? Use the opportunity strategically to highlight sort of like, this is how I'm qualified. It also depends on, you know, like maybe this was a change of career for you and you kind of walk them through that logic of, oh, I was in the profession, I went back to graduate school to earn a degree in this because here's what I learned about myself. I wasn't actually interested in research. I was more interested in working with humans directly, and now I seek to provide guidance and advice. So how you answer that question is really individual specific, and it depends on sort of how you got to the point where you are now. So I hope that was helpful, Rachel.
Yes, thank you so much.
Any tips on how to okay, so Kimberly has asked, if the interviewer asks a question and you draw a blank, are there any tips on how to recover from this and how to come up with an answer? Okay, great. Thanks, Rachel. So back to Kimberly, this is a great question. Where you can buy time is, again, sort of the strategies of, asking them, can you repeat the question? Could you word the question differently? In those instances, you're buying yourselves seconds, right? You're buying yourself seconds to help sort of not panic, right? If you need to, you can consult your notes, just look real quickly at your notes and see like, oh, does anything stick out that would sort of prime me? So part of Kimberly, part of the interview process, part of it is designed to catch you off guard. And that is not meant to scare you. That what I mean by that is they want to know, how are you going to respond in a situation where you're caught off guard or where you're unprepared to answer a question, right? So I remember randomly being asked one time, this was like in the final stages of interviews. I was asked by the committee member, by the hiring manager, Bryan, what are you watching on Netflix right now? Excuse me? Like, that 70s show, I like, what do I do with this? Or Mean Girls, like how do I respond to that? And so in that case, you know, in my mind I was thinking, okay, is there something career oriented, or like, how can I really, no, scratch that, that's not going to work. I'm just going to be perfectly honest here and tell you this is exactly what I'm watching on Netflix right now. And it was that 70s show. And that they found humor in that, and they're like, oh, of course, that makes sense, you're from the Midwest, like, oh, those are your people, you can relate to the Wisconsin kids, like, so there are strategies for buying time. I ascribe to like, hey, I'm being my authentic self. I'm telling you what I'm really watching. I tried to connect it to career, to the job, but also I just assumed in that moment, hopefully they were trying to get to know me as a person and sort of set the professional stuff aside. So hopefully that was helpful, Kimberly. Okay. So with that, I want to thank everyone for your time today. If you have any follow-up, certainly we're here. Oops, there's one last question. One more question. I'm entirely sure if a red flag is
I was trying to
how
say
can
I'm not
we
entirely sure.
spot the company's red flags, or if the company's not, they present themselves to be. So basically the question is spotting red flags with employers. And I find, so some of those red flags are if, pay attention to the room. Are folks happy? Are they happy to be there? Is one person dominating the conversation, or is the hiring manager not allowing others to speak? So how to spot red flags? I think you asked red flags if the company not what they present themselves to be. Yeah, and so I think I honestly think that that's a really good question, because organizations have an online presence, they have a web presentation, right? They have the social media accounts, and they're presenting themselves in a way. And so it's important to ask questions in your interview, maybe not that direct, but something like, why do each of you work here? Like, what excites you every day? Or, when you get up every day, what do you look forward to at work? Or ask, what is it like to work here? What is the culture? What is the climate? And from that, you're going to get a sense of, well, you already know what the web presence is, the social media sort of image is, but you're going to get real life feedback, right? So what are they telling you in real time? And then you sort of reflect after the fact and say, oh, it seems that what they present is true, and they are doing X, Y, Z. So ask those questions at the end of the interview. You may not word it directly like, this is how you present yourself. Is it true? But ask in subtle ways. Is that helpful, Rachel? But again, okay, good. Other red flags were things like, just attitude and sort of body language. And again, if one person is dominating and that person's not allowing other people on the committee to talk, like that's kind of a red flag. Or yeah, I think that's sufficient. Okay, great. Well, it is time, and I have to move on to another presentation, so I get to keep talking. But I want to thank all of you for being here. If you have follow-up, we're here, or the other career centers if you're undergrad or business school or GSAS, but we're here to support you. Feel free to reach out if you have any further questions. All right. So thank you all for being here, and we look forward to being in touch.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.